Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever met someone who made you feel like the center of the universe? Like you were the missing puzzle piece they'd been searching for their entire life? That feeling, the high of being adored so deeply, so quickly, can be intoxicating. It doesn't start with manipulation. It starts with intensity, the good kind, the kind that feels like fate, like lightning, like something out of a movie. But that's exactly the trap. The moment you start to feel like, this is too good to be true, it usually is. In the early stages of a relationship with a narcissist, everything feels perfect. They mirror your desires. They listen intently, nod at all the right moments, remember the tiniest details. They say all the words you've been longing to hear. It's not a coincidence. It's a strategy. It's called love bombing. You're being showered with attention, affection, praise, and promises, not because they feel love the way you do, but because they want control. They create a fantasy so beautiful, you'll spend the rest of the relationship trying to get back to it. That version of them, the one who made you feel like magic, that's not real, but you don't know that yet. And by the time you start to question it, you're already emotionally invested. They don't take their time. Narcissists speed up the intimacy to create an illusion of connection. They'll tell you you're meant to be, that they've never felt this way about anyone, that no one has ever understood them like you do. You think you've found someone who finally gets you. You bond over vulnerabilities, shared goals, past pain, but what's really happening is they're collecting data. They're studying your emotional map, your dreams, your fears, your insecurities, so they know exactly where to strike later. And here's where it gets even more dangerous, because love bombing doesn't just make you fall in love. It makes you feel chosen, desired, seen. It awakens a deep hunger inside you that may have gone unfulfilled for years, the need to be appreciated, to feel safe, to be told, "You're everything I've been looking for." And in that moment, your brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, adrenaline, all the bonding chemicals that make you feel emotionally attached and psychologically loyal. It's not love. It's a chemical cocktail that binds you to the illusion. So when the mask starts to slip, and it always does, you're not just hurt, you're confused. You wonder what you did wrong to make things change. You start chasing that first version of them, the one who made you feel special. You tell yourself, if I can just do everything right again, maybe they'll come back. Maybe the magic will return. But the truth is, the magic was manufactured. They gave you the blueprint of your ideal partner and wore it like a costume. You didn't fall in love with who they are. You fell in love with who they pretended to be, and that's not your fault. That's the setup. That's the design. You weren't weak for believing. You were human for wanting it to be real. Imagine being on a roller coaster that never ends. One moment you're soaring through the clouds with joy, and the next, you're plummeting into uncertainty, confusion, and heartbreak. That's exactly what it feels like to be in a relationship driven by intermittent reinforcement. It's one of the most powerful psychological hooks a narcissist uses to keep you trapped. And the most terrifying part, you don't even realize it's happening until you're already addicted to the emotional chaos they've created. At the start, you're flooded with validation, praise, and affection. You feel important, prioritized, even worshipped. But then, without warning, it's all taken away. They grow cold, distant, moody. You're left wondering what you did wrong, retracing your every step. Did you say something to upset them? Are they just going through something? The silence is deafening. But just as you're beginning to accept the distance, they come back. With a kiss, a kind word, a memory of how good things used to be. And in that moment, the emotional floodgates open again. Relief rushes through you. You feel seen again. Hope returns. What you don't realize is that this cycle is by design. The narcissist is conditioning you to associate their approval with emotional survival. Your brain starts to chase the highs and avoid the lows. The inconsistency isn't a red flag, it becomes the very thing you crave. And that craving is addictive. It mimics the brain patterns of a person hooked on gambling, always waiting for the next win, the next payout, the next moment of closeness. This cycle becomes your new normal. The moments of kindness don't outweigh the cruelty. They just make you forget it temporarily. When they treat you well again, it feels like you've earned it. Like your patience, your love, your willingness to forgive have finally paid off. But the reality is, they were never consistent to begin with. They engineered a system where you question your worth unless it's being measured by their validation. And slowly, you stop noticing how much you're suffering. You stop noticing how much of yourself you're giving up just to get that next hit of approval. It's easy to tell someone to walk away from a bad relationship when you're not the one caught in the loop. But when you're in it, you're not thinking logically. You're emotionally invested, chemically bonded, and psychologically wired to chase the version of them that no longer exists, or maybe never existed in the first place. You begin to feel that if you just try a little harder, love a little better, wait a little longer, they'll return to the person they used to be. But they never stay long enough. They only reappear to reset the cycle. You find yourself walking on eggshells, never knowing which version of them you're going to get. The charming one who holds you close, or the cold one who vanishes without a trace. And each time they disappear and return, the space between gets a little wider, the cruelty a little sharper, but the hope, that dangerous hope, burns just as strong. Have you ever started second, guessing things you were once sure about, like what was said in an argument, how someone made you feel, or whether your reactions were even valid? That slow unraveling of your confidence in your own mind is not an accident. It's a calculated weapon, and it has a name: gaslighting. It's one of the narcissist's most potent tools, and it doesn't begin with bold, obvious lies. It begins with subtle shifts in your reality that are so slight, you question whether the problem is actually you. At first it might look like innocent forgetfulness. You bring up something they said that hurt you, and they respond with, "I never said that," or "You're making things up." You pause, maybe you misremembered, maybe you misunderstood, but then it happens again and again. The events are real, the hurt is real, but the narcissist denies it with such conviction that eventually you begin to distrust your memory. You find yourself needing evidence just to validate your own feelings. Over time, the gaslighting gets deeper. You start to hear phrases like, "You're too sensitive," "You're overreacting," "No one else would put up with this." These statements aren't just about winning an argument. They're about breaking your spirit, about making you question your own emotional responses until you start silencing yourself. What used to trigger your boundaries now just triggers shame. You stop speaking up not because the pain has disappeared, but because you've been trained to believe your pain isn't legitimate. This psychological erosion doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow, steady chipping away at your self-trust. At first, you fight back, you hold on to what you know is true, but eventually you grow tired. You doubt yourself so much that you start looking to them for validation of what's real, what's acceptable, what's worth reacting to. And that's the trap. You surrender your inner compass and hand it to someone who benefits from you being lost. Gaslighting turns your own mind into an enemy. You feel anxious, unsure, unsteady. You start rehearsing conversations in your head, constantly editing your words before speaking. You begin walking through the relationship like a minefield, afraid that one wrong step will lead to yet another emotional explosion you'll later be blamed for. The more confused you get, the more you cling to the narcissist for clarity. The more invalidated you feel, the more desperate you become for them to reassure you. But they never do. They leave you starving for closure that never comes and clarity that only deepens your confusion. What makes gaslighting so destructive is that it isolates you, not just from others, but from your own self. You don't just lose trust in your partner. You lose trust in your emotions, your instincts, even your memories. You start apologizing for things that weren't your fault, taking blame just to keep the peace, suppressing your reactions because you fear being labeled as dramatic or crazy. And once you've reached that point, The narcissist doesn't even need to lie to you anymore, because you've started lying to yourself. What if the very things that make you a beautiful human being, your empathy, your loyalty, your willingness to see the best in others, are the exact things being used to keep you trapped? That's the dark irony of being in a relationship with a narcissist. They don't just exploit your wounds, they exploit your strengths. They don't go after your weakness like most manipulators. They go after what makes you rare. They learn how to weaponize your goodness, and they do it so subtly that you think staying is a sign of love, when in reality it's a result of manipulation. Think about it. You stay because you care. You stay because you believe in people's ability to change. You've been through hard things before, and you pride yourself on being resilient, on not giving up when things get tough. The narcissist sees this early on and knows exactly how to frame the relationship so that every red flag looks like a challenge to overcome instead of a reason to leave. They paint themselves as damaged, misunderstood, or haunted by their past. And because you're kind and compassionate, you lean in, you don't walk away. You think maybe they just need someone to believe in them. That's the trap. Your loyalty becomes your leash. They test how far they can push you. The first time they cross a line, they apologize. Maybe they cry. Maybe they tell you no one's ever made them feel safe like you do. So you stay. Then they do it again. But this time, they shift the blame. You hurt them, you made them act that way, you triggered their pain, and because you're reflective, introspective, and honest with yourself, you consider it, you analyze your role, you don't want to be selfish. You think, maybe I could have handled that better. But here's the thing, healthy relationships don't ask you to abandon yourself to keep the peace. Narcissistic ones do, and they do it by slowly convincing you that your ability to endure is proof of your love. They don't ask you to walk away when it hurts. They expect you to prove your devotion by staying through the hurt. Over time, you begin to equate suffering with love. You begin to see your pain as noble, even necessary. You hold on to the idea that if you just give more, love harder, stay longer, they'll eventually become the person you first met. But they don't want to change. They want to keep winning. And they win every time you choose their potential over your peace. Every time you downplay your needs to keep them from feeling attacked. Every time you choose silence over conflict just to avoid another emotional blow-up. They don't respect your compassion. They rely on it. They count on your deep heart to override your logic. They count on your guilt to drown out your instincts. They count on your empathy to keep you coming back even when you're breaking inside, and they're not impressed by your loyalty. They feel entitled to it. They twist it into a duty, an obligation, a reason why you owe them another chance. They make you believe that walking away means you didn't care enough, when in fact, it's the only thing that shows how much you care about yourself. Have you ever noticed how, over time, you start feeling like you have fewer people to talk to, fewer friends to lean on, and fewer safe spaces to just be yourself? That's not just coincidence. That's part of the strategy. Narcissists don't always isolate you with chains. They do it with subtlety, charm, and manipulation. It's not about locking you away. It's about slowly separating you from your support system until they become your only source of emotional connection, validation, and reality. And once that happens, your world shrinks, and so does your ability to leave. In the beginning, they may act like they're just protective. They say things like, "I don't think your friend really supports you," or "your family always seems to bring you down." And because they say it with concern, not aggression, it feels like care. But it's not care, it's control wrapped in flattery. They make you feel like it's you and them against the world, that you've finally found someone who understands you better than anyone else ever has. That kind of bond feels powerful, but it's also blinding. Slowly, you start canceling plans. You start sharing less with friends. You feel guilty when others reach out to you. You stop talking about your relationship because you know deep down something isn't right, and you don't want to hear the truth. The narcissist encourages this silence. They'll reward you when you put them first, punish you with withdrawal or criticism when you don't. You begin internalizing the message, I can only keep the peace if I prioritize them above everyone else. That isolation doesn't happen in one big moment. It happens in 100 small ones that feel like choices, but aren't really choices at all. And then comes the fear, not just fear of them, but fear of being alone. Because once your world revolves around them, the idea of life without them feels like jumping into darkness. Even if you're unhappy, the narcissist has conditioned you to believe that they're your only constant, your only source of love, even if that love comes with pain. They've created an emotional dependency where the thought of being without them feels terrifying, even though being with them is exhausting. You start thinking, who else would understand me? Who else would put up with me? Not realizing that these are thoughts they planted in your mind to keep you small, you become convinced that you'll be lost without them, that you've invested too much time, too much emotion, too much of yourself to start over. They remind you how no one else will love you like they do. And it's true, because healthy love doesn't come with threats, guilt, or manipulation. But by this point, you're emotionally drained. You're so used to walking on eggshells, to bracing for impact, that even the idea of freedom feels dangerous. You've been so isolated that the silence of separation sounds louder than the chaos of staying. And this is where the deepest trap lies. They've made you forget that you once had a life outside of them, that you once laughed freely, made decisions confidently, and shared your heart openly without fear. They've made themselves your only source of connection. So leaving, what if every time you thought about leaving, you felt a strange wave of guilt wash over you? Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've been conditioned to believe that loving someone means staying, no matter how much it hurts. That's the final grip of a narcissist, the manipulation of your identity. They don't just want control of the relationship. They want control of how you see yourself. They want to rewrite your story in a way that makes their chaos feel like your responsibility, their pain your fault, and their love something you have to earn. At first, the manipulation doesn't feel like control, it feels like intimacy. They open up to you about their trauma. They talk about how they've been betrayed, misunderstood, or abandoned. You begin to see them not as a narcissist, but as someone broken, someone who just needs the right kind of love to heal. And because you care deeply, you accept that role. You wear the weight of being their savior like a badge of honor. You tell yourself, if I can just love them enough, maybe I can fix what others couldn't. But slowly, that narrative shifts. They stop being the wounded soul and start becoming the critic. They pick apart your words, your tone, your timing. One day you're too emotional. The next you're cold and distant. No matter what you do, it's never quite right. And the more you try to please them, the more exhausted you become. You begin to lose your sense of identity because everything gets filtered through their approval. If they're happy, you feel okay. If they're not, you feel like a failure. You're no longer living for yourself. You're living to avoid conflict, to gain moments of peace, to be seen as good enough. The most damaging part, you start measuring yourself worth by their shifting standards. When they're affectionate, you feel lovable. When they're distant or cruel, you feel broken. It's a roller coaster where your sense of value rises and falls depending on how they treat you. And because they've embedded themselves so deeply into your emotional framework, you begin to internalize their voice as your own. You don't need them to insult you anymore. You've started doing it to yourself. You second guess your instincts, you apologize for having needs, you silence your own voice to keep theirs from getting louder. They've trained you to fear your independence, to believe that setting a boundary makes you selfish, to think that wanting more means you're ungrateful. So when you finally get the urge to leave, when your body starts screaming for peace, your mind fights back with guilt. You think, maybe I didn't try hard enough, or what if I'm the one who's toxic? You question everything except the one thing you should, whether they ever truly valued you. This is how they break you without laying a hand on you. not through violence, but through erosion, not with anger, but with confusion. They reshape you until you no longer recognize yourself without them, and once your identity is entangled in their version of reality, escaping doesn't just feel hard. It feels like betrayal, not betrayal of them, but betrayal of the version of yourself you became just to survive them.